and entertainment and correspondent at The Telegraph, India McTaggart. Good to have you both with us. Soon out in what is increasingly a lovely day as well.
It's looking very nice from what I can see from here.
We're kind of just doing this, looking through the, kind of the windows, but it's going to be a grand day. We appreciate you giving up a bit of it to take a look at the papers,
Not
both
at
of
all.
you. Let's just touch on the front page of the Express. It's a sentiment that's kind of bubbling about in other papers too. Riot police on alert as more protests planned.
Yeah, it really dominated today's papers, this situation, and it's sort of talking about two different sets of protests which have led to quite a turbulent weekend in the UK, as we've seen many of them really recently. So in London we've seen the Palestine Action protests yesterday, which have led to hundreds of arrests, the highest number of arrests in a single day from the Met Police in 10 years.
474 the figure at the moment.
It's really quite high, and of all different age groups, all different backgrounds, there's a picture, I think on the front of the Times, of an 89-year-old woman being arrested. They were peacefully protesting, but the reason that they're liable for arrest is that Palestine Action, the group that they were supporting, was prescribed last month under the Terrorism Act, which means that supporting it is now an offence. But people have still come out, largely because of the scenes that we've seen in Gaza, those horrific photos of starving children, which have really mobilised, galvanised public opinion. But at the same time, we've seen very different kinds of protests around asylum seeker hotels. So there have been quite a lot of those reported recently. You know, most recently we saw those scenes in Epping, and that was after someone living at one of these hotels was accused and charged with a sexual assault offence, something that we should say he denies. And also last year, of course, we saw horrible riots after the Southport attack, after you know, the three lovely young girls was wrongly accused of being an asylum seeker, and the local mosque there was damaged, and one of the hotels was set on fire. So there have been some quite violent scenes that we've seen, and I think, you know, it goes to show on that side of things how important migration still is for so many people. Yeah. It's been top of the political agenda for such a long time, but I think many people will be quite disturbed, quite alarmed to see this kind of political opinion sort of descending in that way.
It feels like both a long time ago and still fresh in the memory, all of the riots, not just in Southport, but across the country. You know, they even into Northern Ireland last summer, and I'm sure all the authorities desperate to stop a repeat of that, whatever the kind of the thing that kindles that potential disorder and unrest.
It's difficult, though, isn't it, to stop that? I mean, actually, in the most recent ones we've seen of the immigration protests, a lot of the disorder comes between the groups that are counter-protesting and then the protesters themselves. And these are just such hot-button political issues. Immigration, we know Israel-Gaza is also a huge political sort of inflammatory issue for many people. And while yesterday's Parliament Square protest was peaceful, as you mentioned rightly, they are supporting now a prescribed terrorist organisation. So they have to sort of, police are under huge strain because they've got to arrest now hundreds of people as opposed to just the ones that were being disorderly. And
it was very controversial when Palestine Action was prescribed. You know, the UN Human Rights Chief said that it was very concerning. There's a lot of controversy within Parliament, within the public. So it isn't a sort of wholly accepted necessarily, you know, it feels quite contested, but it is the law, and people do know that they're taking that risk when they go out.
And actually, I mean, we saw some Labour backbenchers yesterday calling the protesters heroes and comparing them to suffragettes, which I'm not sure how fair that is, but yeah, it's interesting that they come from all walks of life as well, as you mentioned. There was even someone that was in a wheelchair, a pensioner in a wheelchair, that came out to risk arrest and support Palestine Action.
The bit about this headline on the Express, the riot police part of it, and I know there are issues with policing and the way that's been done, and I'm not here to defend it, but it does also strike me when you see images of bottles and bars and things being thrown at officers, burning bins being wheeled in their direction, you know, whatever kind of force that they're facing. The police is referred to as this kind of amorphous blob, but behind that individual is somebody's son or mother, and like it is a human that's having to stand up to that potentially overwhelming level of aggression and hatred and anger and violence, etc. And I don't envy them at all in trying to play the role that they have to do in these situations, like you say, often between two groups, for example. You know, and people do put themselves in harm's way to try and protect others.
And actually, I mean, we saw this yesterday, the deep hostility felt towards police in this instance of the Palestine Action protests, as well as, of course, the deep hostility they felt for, or feel for the but it's the labelling of them as pigs and the shouting at them as they arrest people, and you really just saw that, and I agree with you there that it's someone's son and just someone trying to do their job and follow the law.
Let's move on to the BBC, shall we? A BBC Pays story that kind of takes us back to last year, even actually back to 2023. And normally we talk about BBC, we're talking about the BBC Stars and the pay list that comes out roughly in July, etc. Yes. This is a completely different story, and one that shocked many people at the time, and there's been a development, right?
There has been a development, yes. So this follows on from the Hugh Edwards scandal, which was their lead, one of their lead presenters. He presented BBC News at 10. Following on from his resignation, his subsequent, he was forced to resign and then subsequently pleaded guilty to possessing indecent images of children. So now the BBC has quietly revised its rules for paying suspended staff to basically prevent a repeat of the furore that happened when it was revealed last year that he remained on full pay for 5 months. So actually we saw the BBC chairman in May publicly come out and say, you know, Hugh Edwards, this was on Times Radio, Hugh Edwards, if you were listening to this, you know, pay us back the 200k, you know that it's the right thing to do. So this was, he received his full salary for 5 months after his resignation, and they essentially just wanted to close this loophole that allowed suspended staff to remain on full pay indefinitely. It's now more in line with their sick pay, so they're only going to pay suspended staff who claim to be unwell 18 weeks of full pay and then 9 weeks at half their salary. But it was, of course, a huge scandal when it came out that Hugh Edwards was still being paid the full amount following the claims that he was facing the investigation that he was under. And at the time, he was claiming mental health and they couldn't quite oust him. But it was, looked pretty bad on them.
I think people are particularly sensitive, aren't they, around where their money goes at the moment. And of course, you know, the BBC is taxpayer funded. And I think people want to see it put to good use, understandably, at a time when people are all feeling the pinch with the cost of living crisis. You know, I think people care sort of more than ever, really, about where it is that their money's being spent. So I think it did cause a huge strength of feeling. And I think some people will be pleased to see that the policy's been changed.
Totally. And I think behind all of these stories is, you know, I worked at the BBC for a decade, is a huge body of individuals doing incredible stuff. And a lot of that often gets lost in these kind of stories, and often sometimes, dare I say, in some of the inaction or reticence to have action by the BBC as a body at times, because it struggles to quite know what to do. And some of the members who work for it are looking and going, come on. Yeah. And that kind of takes away and distracts from incredible people doing incredible jobs a lot of the time, the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of the time.
I think also people, you know, we have to acknowledge here that the right-wing press in particular loves an anti-BBC story. You know, there is a lot of people sort of gunning for negative headlines around the BBC. It doesn't, even though it's itself supposed to be impartial, taxpayer-funded, it doesn't exist in a political vacuum, the BBC. So while there's obviously some very sort of serious issues at the heart of this particular story and some people very badly hurt, I think there is also an element that some elements of the press do like to see the BBC fail.
Let's move on, shall we, to The Times, page 14.
Yeah, this is quite an interesting one and might be a surprise to lots of people. There's been a rhetoric, which I've definitely heard, I don't know if you guys have as well, around the fact that state school kids have it easier getting into Oxbridge because of the state school that they come from. And actually, this report dispels that. So stats from the application figures to Oxbridge actually reveals that state school pupils who apply are less likely to get offered a place than their private school counterparts. So a fifth of state-educated pupils, just under, at 19%, got offered a place when they applied, compared to 24% from private schools. There's been quite a lot, and again, this is anecdotal, I don't have empirical evidence on this, but I've definitely heard of lots of people, people I know, who got moved to a state school for sixth form after a long private school education. India's nodding. It's quite a common sort of practice to, in a way, slightly game the system and make it appear it's coming from a state school applicant. Technically it is, but obviously they've had a long-term private education.
Never heard that
Haven't
situation,
you?
never.
It's definitely a thing. And actually what this report is saying is that that doesn't work. And I mean, you know, there's a lot around the sort of private school advantage here, but I think it's worth really remembering, depending on what stats you look at, it's somewhere between 7 and 13% of the public who are privately educated. And yet they disproportionately make up the top fields among universities, among workplaces. And I think, yeah, it's just worth remembering that this is actually a very small percentage of the population, very heavily overrepresented.
But it is worth stating that they do have a drive to increase their disadvantaged pupils, so they do have that in process in the university. But you're right in saying that the representation doesn't then get affected with private school.
Maybe the reason I never crossed my inbox was I was never going to be destined to go to either of them. In fact, a very proud university dropout. My 1 year served me well, and then that was me done.
Well, it hasn't done you any harm, has it, Gareth? Look at where you are now.
It took a bit of time, but we got there eventually. Bless you both for coming in. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Do stay with us. Don't go anywhere here on Sky News.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos, analysis,
Up at 6%.
podcasts, watching us live,
Joins us live.
all in one place, and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.